we got Dave? Yeah, cool. So I'm going to move it. Councillor Collins, are you prepared to second this particular item on 14, which is the East Tamaki Road?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
The answer he's looking for is yes.
So
I'm
just
there.
to
Sorry,
the-
I was
Yeah,
distracted.
so
I beg your pardon.
This is just to put it on the table for discussion. So Dave, it's all
Make
yours.
sure you
Hi,
Here we are.
it's just a compliance item really, just getting things correct under the Reserves Act. We have to do that when we find these things.
I'm happy to
Okay.
move, Mr. Chairman.
Pardon? Oh, it's been moved.
Oh,
and
sorry,
seconded.
we've
That's
seen
all
it now.
Yeah.
now have a
So look, no, if there's questions, as you can see in the report, the local board support this particular recommendation. So if there's no questions or comments, I will move the recommendation. Sorry, not move. I'll put the recommendations being moved in second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 15. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Item 15.
Good news.
It is very good news, but again, I'm not going to tempt fate, just in case there's a debate. So look, again,
I'll
if I just calling a move in a second,
I'll
if you
move.
wish. Yep, move Simpson and Hills, just to put on the table for discussion. And I'm just going to invite Paul and Kataraina to speak to this report.
The purpose of this report really is just to, as quickly as possible after the close of last financial year, to be as transparent as possible to yourselves and to Aucklanders about expenditure on acquisitions for parks and open space. So this sets out for you where that has been expended. It also sets out decisions made under delegation, and as promised, we've kept track of all the open space vested in council, so that we can start to get a feel for the cumulative impact in terms of decision making on those pieces of land that we get at no cost in terms of the initial acquisition. And you'll see that last year we have now got operational costs of $99,629 that weren't really anticipated, and that council at this stage won't get budget for.
So if I could just talk quickly in terms of the communication activities. So we're looking at working with the local board's communication advisors, stories on our Auckland, responding to local media opportunities and general region-wide media responses. And we've had one particular media inquiry as a result of this report being on the agenda.
So I'm going to open up for questions first. So I've got Councillor Simpson.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. My just question is around the communication, and I think that's really important. That this committee has approved the money for open space around the growth, but I'm just I'm interested in your comments around the spokesperson for that. So this has come out of a regional budget, correct? Yes. So I think there needs to be conjoint communication between the councillors and the local boards, because the decision was made by the governing body. Just saying.
No, we've discussed that as well, so that's cool. That's good. Councillor Walker.
Sure. I've just got some questions around this issue that might lead to a further agenda item in a later meeting, Mr. Chair. And they go to the context around this issue historically. It would be useful to assess the amount of open space that we are and have acquired in the 2016-2017 year with past years, so that we have some appreciation of the quantum of open space we're getting, and also the amount of area of land that we're getting, and an indication of what the relative cost is for that area. It would also be useful to have an indication, particularly around the amount of regional park space. I note that it's pretty minimal in this year there are no new regional parks. There's a very small addition to a regional park. It would be useful to have that context going forward. So they are some questions, Mr. Chair. My recommendation is that we have an agenda item that covers off our open space acquisitions over time, both for us, but also so Aucklanders can see how things are trending, because I think the trend is not a good one, and that is something that we should be throwing up if there are issues there, or alternatively I may be mistaken and it could be quite excellent, but I don't think that's the case.
Look, I agree, Councillor Walker, and also I think we need to bear in mind that in 2018 we've got a discussion around the long-term plan. So I mean that's going to set the new 10-year plan, because as you can see in the report, I think there's 600 and, or I don't think it's in the report, Paul, 660 million.
Sure.
In the current.
Over the next.
Yeah, that's
and
the
years.
current long-term plan. So you know that's a discussion we'll have in
So,
2018. So
my
in regards
concern-
to yours, sorry, I just want to finish off this, Councillor Walker. So in regards to your question, and I saw Katarainen and Paul nodding. Yes, it is. So it's taken on board.
Just my concern around the long-term plan and the process generally is we just keep pushing a reset button that at every point points us to declines in various areas, and we lose the historical context of where we've come from. So just a quick question around this. So is it possible to bring those numbers forward?
Through the chair, what we can do is bring a report that looks back since amalgamation, the acquisitions,
Yeah,
and
cool.
provides that
Thank you.
data and context.
Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, this is very, very useful. I like the way it's laid out and the information it conveys and helps, albeit for 1 year. It presents a pretty good snapshot of what's going on. The only comment I would make in terms, and particularly as it applies to this open space vested in the council at no capital cost, the operational costs there, and I have raised it in the past.
So John, did you want to ask the questions and then
Yes,
comment later, or I mean you can do? I'd rather have the speaking after, but
Well, I was.
just
If I'd
going to
been allowed to
incorporate it.
continue, my question would have been asked by now.
Okay, sorry.
And it was simply just to say, they seem high operational costs for, in particular when we're dealing with neighbourhood parks and other areas that are basically just a little, blank bit of land with some grass on it. It seems to me that they could be done a lot cheaper, and I'm just wondering, have we had any sort of rough analysis of that operational cost component?
Through the chair, we are reliant on our operational staff and community facilities who maintain the parks to give us the figures, but we can talk to them about how they're calculating and what they're based on. And we could bring that information back with the memo, with the longer history of acquisitions. So we could give you a better idea of why they're giving us those figures and how they're based. I do know that they recently updated their methodology as well. So you'll see a lot of the more recent acquisitions, the price of maintenance is generally dearer than what's coming through those in the past.
The other question, Mr Chair, just following on from Councillor Walker, going to the regional park component, that's really useful to know when we come back, and I'm just checking if this is right, that we'll have some sense of the amount of regional parks that have been acquired since the Super City started. Am I correct in saying that's what's going to come in? Because of course that's separate but obviously connected, so that'll be very useful. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Newman.
I'm on comments, so if there's
Okay, cool.
questions.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's a very good report. I do like Councillor Watson, the way you've laid it out there. It's very easy to read and understand, so some very good information there. So my question, Mr Chair, I've got three fairly brief questions. One's just clarification. When I read clause 4 there, it talks about that these costs were unbudgeted around some operational costs there, just under 100,000 per annum. And then down in 8, it talks about operational costs are provided in the LTP plan as a percentage. Could you just clarify? That just seems a little bit mixed for me, Mr Chair.
Through the chair, so budgets are set through the LTP process, and when we acquire land as in purchase it, then there's a budget that goes through from that to provide for the development and maintenance of it. When we acquire land at no capital cost, there is no budget that's allocated
Wonderful.
for the maintenance.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, thank you very much. Question number 2. So obviously we're looking here, there seems to be a lot of the parks are being bought in the or vested in the growth areas, which I guess makes sense, and you mentioned this in the report. So obviously we're just trying to understand DCs, and I'm happy to take this offline if need be, that percentage of the development contributions that actually go towards funding your acquisitions. Is that a set formula, or how does that work?
Through the chair, it's set through the long-term plan. So the current budget, 96% of the open space acquisition budget is driven by development contributions. So there's only 4% that's non-growth related.
Yep. Right. So of the DCs, that's the part that goes towards parks, though. There must be other proportions of the DC that go towards the other transport, etc. Okay, thank you. And just final questions around when we do buy it. My impression, and I may be wrong, is that we're purchasing this property kind of at the end of when a development might occur. Therefore, it's probably at its maximum commercial value, rather than perhaps trying to buy them up front. Is there a way around that, or is that a policy, or can we do better in terms of the bang for buck we can get through these acquisitions?
Through the chair, it really depends on the type of park. So we buy neighbourhood parks late because the purpose of a neighbourhood park is to service the catchment from that community that's been developed. Other parks we can buy much earlier on in the process. So as soon as we have a structural plan, for example, in Whenuapai, we're able to buy sports parks well in advance of development, and of course those are much larger pieces of land. It's more important, larger savings from buying earlier in the process. So as soon as it's part of a structure plan, we're able to look at purchasing that land. Suburb parks, again, could probably be developed and bought earlier on in the process because they are serving a wide suburb area, but the neighbourhood parks we really do buy right at the end of the process.
Okay, that's a very helpful answer. So just to that I've heard you correctly, structure plans are quite key in terms of your processes, in terms of when to buy and what to buy.
Correct. So in terms of allocating development contributions, we can spend them 10 years in advance if they're in a structure plan,
Right.
and we can spend development contributions 30 years in advance if they're in the 30-year infrastructure plan.
Right. Most helpful. Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mike Lee, questions?
In terms of acquisition, my question is, are we talking about purchase or are we talking about acquisition broadly? Because there are one or two good examples where land is given to the council. And in terms of regional parks, Browns Island, Motukorea Browns Island, comes into that category. So are we just talking about purchases or?
Through the chair, so we've only just this year started recording all purchases. So if you have a look at table 3, we've captured the ones that occurred in 2016, 2017.
Just to make the very good, respond to the very good point, valid point raised by Councillor Walker, there is some good news in that something that the council has owned since 1955, which is before most people in the room were born, is now actually operating as a regional park. So it's a kind of an acquisition. It's been the management has been transferred from DOC, and I think the last key was handed over a month or so ago. So a whole lot of volunteers are on the island pulling weeds in the new regional park on Saturday.
Just through the chair, if we can get the data when we're compiling information about
It's
regional
an exception to the
parks.
rule, isn't it?
We'll have a look. We'll have a look at what kind of list we can compile of all the land since amalgamation that we've received at no cost to council. We'll have a good look and see if we can find all of that as well at the same time.
Okay, Matu Wilcox.
Just a couple of quick ones. This is quite a good report. I'm really thankful that you've been able to do this. I mean, it's great to see 8 hectares at Westho and 3 hectares at Whitfords, and even the 7 hectares at Hungaya. In your report, you just queried, you just got this in this point 5, a communication initiative. And you've kind of covered it a little bit, but I'm just wondering, were you thinking to devote some dollars to do this communication, or how were you thinking to go forward with this?
Generally, we were looking to use existing council channels for communication and networks and staff time, but we weren't looking to generally pay for any communication or promotion materials.
Good answer.
Okay. Any further? No? Okay. Questions or speaking to the recommendation?
Speaking.
Yep, okay, I'll wait. Question or speaking, John?
Speaking.
Okay, cool. Okay then, Councillor Newman, speaking.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I guess my comments around, I mean, it's a good report and I do thank the officers for this. I think there will continue to be a need to balance the requirement for neighbourhood parks, which I think are essential for the well-being of every resident, with the need to acquire land that will be specific for sports parks and active surfaces. And that somehow, I'm not quite sure if the open space budget or if reserve contributions can be used for this purpose, but part of accommodating growth isn't just about acquisitions, it's also about ensuring that our existing sports parks are better drained, that there is lighting, irrigation, to maximise the utility of our fields, particularly for established neighbourhoods where there isn't a lot of opportunity to acquire new land. The land is either very scarce or gone. But that is, I mean, if we're talking in the post-unitary plan era, as we get intensification, it's not just greenfields intensification. Greenfields development, there will be intensification in the isthmus in particular, but also in parts of South and West Auckland and over the shore, that we do actually expand the capacity of our existing parks and open spaces and sports fields, and if there is an opportunity to recalibrate our reserve contributions policy for that purpose, that would be good. The other thing I would say, Mr. Chair, is that I think that Wayne Walker is correct, that there is a need to deepen our acquisitions budget so as to enable us to purchase new land. If we don't change that reserve contributions policy, we will not be able to afford the increasingly scarce and very expensive land necessary to accommodate this. And I just go to the point that, and I think it was a fair point that Councillor Sayers raised in relation to the timing of acquisition. I mean, I'm not sure about some of these other locations, but the ability to purchase the suburban park in Hungaya was made possible because we're purchasing that land off Watercare, I think. So we're able to do that because it was part of the family. But the point is a good one. The timing impacts on the cost. These very significant capital costs do need to be worn. And unless there is a means to address the timing of acquisition, we're going to continue to face a squeeze whereby we end up purchasing land at an absolute premium. So, I support this, Mr. Chair, but I'd have to say that I actually think there's quite a bit of comment out there in the community already
around this issue, and it will be a very hot debate when we get to the long-term plan.
Yep, definitely. Councillor Fletcher.
Mr Chairman, I want to speak to this only briefly, but to support, if the purpose of this is to have communication with the public and we're not going to spend a lot of money on it, I genuinely believe that we should be including motor courier in any communication. I know that it isn't a new acquisition. It was the philanthropy of Sir Ernest Davis that enabled Aucklanders to have this, but it's really important that Aucklanders understand the follow-through that we have with philanthropy. While it was administered by the Department of Conservation somewhat unsatisfactorily for a goodly period of time, it has come under the management again of the regional parks. And I think for many Aucklanders, you know, it's an iconic piece of our landscape. It will be exciting for them to know that the stewardship for motor courier, or Browns Island as it's more commonly known, will actually be with the council. We should not, if we're going to have these opportunities to have communication with the public, it's not very satisfactory that it's only done in this sort of silo sense. So I would ask that we address this in a comprehensive way, and I'm sure that Mace Ward can provide us with the necessary information that this can go out in an appropriate way. And I think also it's just got such an interesting history as an island, as a motu in the Gulf. So I'm hopeful that excellent officers can give appropriate coverage without great expenditure in the area, because come this summer, there'll be a lot of people who will look forward to getting out there, and good on those volunteers who went out. You can't, for those of us who've landed there recently, it's needed quite a bit of restoration work even just to uncover the plaque that is there, which actually marks its part of the rich history of Auckland. So I'm hopeful that you can do justice to that story.
And we've got Jo at the back as well, as I said
Good.
earlier. So she's there from our comms team.
Thank you.
Okay then. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just briefly, a few points in relation to this item, and first is to echo the compliments from other councillors to Katarina and Paul with actually presenting the information like this. It is an issue, open space or lack of thereof going forward is a community concern right across Auckland. So I think if information can be provided that shows that the council is doing something. I know these are largely in growth areas and you know, not very much or hardly at all in established areas, but it does show things are happening, and we have an increasingly mobile population, so the scenic reserve that's acquired in Orewa is actually accessible to people from a wider area, and that's what happens with parks. People will travel around and go to different parks if they like them. So there is a wider community benefit, and that needs to be socialised with the community. I would reiterate my concern with the reluctance to acquire open space that's offered to council at no cost in an era where you know, land costs are phenomenal, as we all know. It seems to me to be rather, well, not rather, very short-sighted to turn that down on the basis of an operational cost, and an operational cost that seemed to me to be inflated. I think surely there's a regime, a maintenance regime, a holding pattern regime that could trim those operational costs right down to a bare minimal while the land is developed or utilised for the community in the future. So to get it, to hold it at a basic maintenance until it can, till things are looking a little bit rosier, if that ever happens on the council front. The regional parks, that is a separate but connected, and I think of in my ward regional parks that are now at capacity. So Long Bay Regional Park, at numbers of times during the year, it's chocker. They have to put you know, no vacancy sign up, and people get, you know, if they can be bothered, they'll go up to Shakespeare, which is also pretty full and nearing capacity. So certainly I think in the last term of council, from my recollection, there didn't seem to be too much emphasis on that, certainly not the same degree as the legacy ARC. really took the mantle with that, and we're all the beneficiaries of that, going back to the 1960s and then right through up until the time of dissolution. So I would certainly like to see the regional park network separated out and the plans for that going forward made very visible, because it doesn't seem to have appeared too prominently on the radar to date. And finally, in the last LTP, the council wasn't quite brave enough to confront the developer contributions. There was an amendment put up, but there was a reluctance to go anywhere near there. Once again, in light of the astronomical increase in the value of land, surely the time has come now at this next LTP discussion to look at raising that acquisition and development component to cater for the tsunami of people that are coming, that are already here. Not to do that, I think, would be undercutting the good work that the officers have done on the new growth areas and the kind of limited fashion that's available by virtue of the budget. It's a problem that can be, or a challenge that can be addressed without cost to the council by simply, raising the contribution by those who are very well able to make it now. There's a huge amount of money being made out of developments, particularly land that's been held for quite some time, and they're really riding off the back of that without it being returned to the community in a commensurate fashion, as indeed was the case in previous years. So thank you, folk, but obviously a lot of work to be done, and I hope there's a will to confront this area that is really important. That's what defines Auckland. If you look at the surveys that are done, survey after surveys, you get the same message. The people that in Auckland appreciate most is their parks and their open space network. That comes through in questionnaire after questionnaire, and it is more so now, not less so. So let's get behind our team and give them the ability to acquire that land that our city's going to need going into the next decades.
Oh, Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I just want to highlight probably the smallest acquisition on that list. It's something that I took a personal interest in. It's actually on a couple of pages near the top of 120 and 121, referred to twice. It's a small access way. I'm highlighting this because often we get fixated with the big acquisitions, and I don't discount the need for that. But my suggestion is that there's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit that's staring at us, but we're not quite noticing it. And this is an access way that connects a community to a bay that's inaccessible unless you get very wet or walk at low tide. This acquisition took our team, and I have to take my hat off to our legal team who finally clinched this. You can see a capital cost to council there of $270,000. It should have been a lot less. This was an access way that was owned by 16 dead people who bought it for the community to guarantee in perpetuity access for not just their local community, but whatever the community might be defined as, to enjoy that small bay, a place called Secret Cove. I identified it as being at risk. And as affluence and property values escalate, sure enough, somebody else took an interest in acquiring that land, and they put a caveat on the title as soon as we expressed interest in acquiring it. And then there was an offer, exactly at the offer price that we had to match, which was considerably higher than we originally thought we would be able to acquire that property at. There are access ways, I believe, like this all over Auckland that I think we need to have a look at, and you just come across them by trawling plans, as I did. I've since now identified two more quite similar, one in a very affluent part of Takapuna, and I'm sure when it is highlighted, neighbours there will also be taking an interest in acquiring it when it should be acquired by a public body like ourselves, council. So these small little gems are all over Auckland, I believe, and I think they can be acquired at quite modest sums, but the benefits are quite considerable. It's not all about a sports field and big open space. Often it's what a small access way like this can provide a local community or a bigger community access to. In this case, it's a small bay, it's the place to go boating, kayaking, hang out with your kids, throw a fishing line in the water. Tremendous values there, which I don't think we're quite realising. So I just want to leave that with you, Chair, but I'd like to acknowledge the staff, excuse me, the staff, for persevering in the face of being threatened by court action, by some neighbours there in my own community. I know this community well, I live very close, that's how I came across this title. But without the perseverance and tenacity of our legal team and some other staff in our parks area, this would have been lost and it would have been privatised as of today. In perpetuity, we now own it, which is a good outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Darby, and I also want to just thank our staff as well. One around that budget, I mean 47.9 and 46.4 spend on it. But I do look forward to the debate at long-term plan around DCs. Also, you know, we have to address the issue around just under $100,000 of unbudgeted maintenance cost, because, you know what I mean, it'll be interesting to see how many pieces of land or pockets of land that we've purchased which wasn't sort of flagged as essential, but we ended up purchasing anyway. I wonder how much the maintenance costs for those that didn't fall within the policy, but somehow we ended up purchasing it because it was the people around this particular table. But to our staff, thank you so much. Please pass it on to the others that are there. So look, it's been moved by Councillor Simpson and Councillor Hills. So I will put the recommendation. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried.